Welcome everyone. This lecture here is on Kant's theory of radical evil, which is found in his Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason, a book that's not often considered. People will be aware with his groundwork of metaphysics of morals and also with his metaphysics of morals, and of course also with the second critique, the critique of practical reason. But it is in the Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason that we find his Protestantism at its peak, and also where we find Kant explicitly addressing the problem of evil in terms of his moral philosophy, and of course also in terms of rational religion, a religion that's grounded in reason. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from my master's thesis, which I wrote in 2014 for my MA at King's College in London. And I'm currently working through this thesis again. I'm rewriting it, which will take a while because I do want to publish it at some point at my own Halcyon yearbook, and I'm going to give it to other people and to have a look at it and let me know what they think. And in the meantime, I'm going to be producing a few videos and also will consider your comments for the final version of the piece as I'm rewriting it. Today we're going to be discussing the origin of radical evil, more specifically original sin, in Augustine but also in Kant. And this won't be some arbitrary comparison. I don't want to say this is Augustinian, this is Kantian, etc. But to show why, or to try and show why they both end up in very different, not just positions, but why they say something different of original sin after all, and what this indicates for our time, especially given that we are still in Kant's time, as it were. Before I begin to read my lecture, as always, you're welcome to support the channel in any way you can. There will be several different links down there in the description of this video to do so. And of course you can also study Kant with me in German idealism. Just find the link in the description of this video. There's a course on German idealism that I'm teaching on original sin. We find Kant's notion of radical evil in his essay Religion Within the Boundaries or Bounds of Mere Reason. Religion is here bound up within a reason that is bare. That is to say, not utterly unqualified, but bare, meaning it is unhistorical. It is not practical really, and bare, stripped from everything. But it still bounds or binds religious life within it as within concentric circles, as Kant puts it. Rational religion, Vernunftreligion, even contains within it, as Kant argues in the preface of the second edition of this essay, the revelation, which is, however, historical. That is to say, while religion within the bounds of mere reason does not itself require any historical revelation of God or Christ, and is beyond time and is a priori, rational religion still holds within itself and circles within itself as the outer concentric circle the possibility of historical revelation. But as the latter is contingent, that is to say, Kant attempts to ground religious life in rational philosophy a priori, which requires nothing empirical or any experience of revealed truth. In fact, one could say with some caution that historical revelation is even grounded in rational religion. In any event, grounding religion in rationality is necessary at the time of the Enlightenment. It is a demand of reason itself. Hence, Kant wants to see and show that historical revelation can, quote from Kant, lead back to the same pure system of reason of religion. End of quote. Hence, it is in some way predicated on it. That is, historical revelation is in some way predicated, I would say, on the system reason of religion. Yet importantly, this rational religion is not theoretical, but is self-sufficient in, quote, moral, practical view and intent. More precisely, historical revelation, even if contingent, can lead to rational religion, insofar as the former is grounded in the latter in practical terms, and that is to say, religion within the bounds of mere reason also contains a priori the possibility of cultus and worship. In moral practical terms, rational religion, a priori, already contains worship, and hence there is no need for two separate religions within oneself, and what's more, in this way reason with a capital R and her demands placed upon man in her epoch are reconcilable with Scripture, that again is to say, with the testimony of historical revelation. What Kant wants to show is that there is an a priori rational religion, a religion of reason, which, if not so much as found historical revelation, still historical revelation which is found in Scripture leads back to this pure system of the reason of religion. A bare reason, a bare religion. But as it is, as he claims, practical, there's a bit of a, he's not really arguing for it, it seems in the preface, in the second, that includes worship and cultus. Bare reason, mere reason, bounds up this barren reason, you could almost say, bounds up within it as a concentric circle, and a priori it does so, the possibility of revelation. Hence, what Kant's essay addresses here, even when he refers to Scripture, is not historical revelation, but the a priori necessary and sufficient conditions for religious life, and bound up with this, the question is the question for freedom, free will, and the possibility of radical evil. Even you could say, I guess, the necessity of radical evil. I should probably add that here. It's not just the possibility, it's also the necessity of radical evil. Hence, also the question of original sin is not addressed by Kant in purely historical, or even primarily historical fashion, but as a question of a transcendental possibility and necessity. It is crucial to understand Kant's stance on original sin in order to grasp his notion of radical evil, which, as I said before, we shall address some other time. In the following, I shall therefore discuss the differences between Augustine, who was the first one who didn't proclaim original sin, but introduced it fully into the canon, and of course Kant. So the difference to Kant's understanding of radical evil. And so I won't discuss the origins of radical evil, but what Kant means by radical evil more than how it comes about within the moral subject. If radical evil were simply equal to Augustinian original sin, which some commentators have alleged, I'll get to this in a second, then the Kantian moral subject would rely on prevenient divine aid for moral regeneration. But the Kantian subject is to be free to achieve moral regeneration on his own. This is not to suggest that Kant is entirely divided from Augustine in his religious moral philosophy. Kant's notion of the good will is Augustinian. Both Kant and Augustine hold anti-consequentialist positions, if you like. Both also severely condemn lying, just as an example, since lying, that is speaking the truth speaking the untruth, of course, in a truthful tone, an untruth of which one knows it to be untrue, that corrupts the moral law within oneself, as Kant would put it. Augustine would put it differently. Furthermore, lying also destroys the respect for the other as a rational being, and the respect one should have for one's own rational capacities. Lying turns others into a mere means to an end. But the evil of lying is not so much the consequence the lie may have, but again, the inner arrangement of maximes, as it were, which are reflected in the lie, which the lie which is what produces the lie in the first place, this wretched arrangement of the false maximes and incentives, as it were. So there's an arrangement of maximes which is a priori. This I won't get into here. This is exactly what we'll get into in some other lecture some other time. Kant writes the following in The Religion. We call a human being evil, not because he performs actions that are evil, contrary to law, but because these are so constituted, these actions, that they allow the inference of evil maxims in him. Now there's a ton of issues with such a statement, the inference of evil maxims, etc. But I won't go into this here. In Augustine's Confessions, we find the following proclamation, which speaks to both the innerness of sin and also to the issue of the origin of evil. This is Confessions. O God, hear me. Woe unto men for their sins. When man cries thus, you have mercy upon him. For you made man, but not the sin in him. Even though both Kant and Augustine seem to address the inner self, we must of course not conflate the two. The Kantian inner self is the modern inner self, if you like, hidden away from sight, while Augustine's reference to the sin in man is not personal in any way proto-psychological. The self, and this is unimaginable now to us, here is a divine self, is related to, to God. Also for Kant, one of the main issues is the question of the relationship between the inner and the outer self. Hence, evil is for Kant primarily the result of the chosen maxims and their arrangement. A priori. Augustine, however, places the origin of evil primarily in the sinful flesh. According to Augustine in the Confessions, not even a child that, quote, has lived only one day is without sin. Because semen is evil, he says. Every birth is a birth of sin. In simplified terms, and this is very simplified in terms of Augustine, all humans for Augustine are therefore necessarily and inevitably evil, even of course, if not to the same degree in their actions. But evil by sin. But again, we must not believe that this says that all men are utterly and completely evil in their actions. It's original sin is more about hereditary inheritance of a certain stain upon man. I'll get to this in a second a bit more. Sin indeed is of course not meant as any evil deed, but the stain of sinful birth. But also we shouldn't perhaps overemphasize this, as Nietzsche, for example, would do, to say that the church, as he says, has thrown feces on sex. I think that what sin here does, and I'll get to this more in a second, but what sin is not does, it sounds like a functionality. It's very difficult to get rid of all of these very weird functionalistic ways of saying things now, at least for me. So what sin, original sin, hereditary sin, brings every human being together with the four parents, with the four fathers, the four parents, Adam and Eve. It binds them into the great chain of human being, if you like. Augustine is hard pressed to explain the existence of evil in the world, of course. That's also an issue here. How can there be evil in God's otherwise perfect creation? His explanation in On Nature and Grace for the existence of evil in man is Adam's fall, and I quote again from Augustine. Man's nature indeed was created at first faultless and without any sin, but the flaw which darkens and weakens all those natural goods, so that it has need of illumination and healing, it has not contracted from its blameless creator. but from that original sin which it committed by free will. Augustine's affirmation of original sin is diametrically opposed to Kant's account of moral evil. While the original sinful act must have been an act of misguided free will, God cannot be the origin of evil. Hence, it must have been Adam's free will. Augustine defines evil after the fall negatively as a weakening flaw, a malum metaphysicum, we could also say. Thus, moral evil in man is some sort of debility, a defect in the otherwise perfect creation. But again, it's a metaphysical defect or malum. It's not a personal one or a psychological one. Only Adam's first sin is positively defined, really. Free will, however, is not destroyed by original sin, but is tainted. Kant, however, with his demands for a rational religion, defines moral evil positively as always originating out of freedom for all moral subjects at any time and any place. And it will be Schelling, and I've discussed this in another video which you can find on my channel, Schelling on Evil. Schelling will relate back to Kant to this essay here, when Schelling turns to evil as the necessary moment for human freedom to come about. But does not Kant mean something similar as Augustine, when he claims that all human beings are evil and quote, even the best? This is from the Religion. Not quite. Kant means something else, I think, than original sin here. Radical evil means that man at the root is evil. At the root meaning there is in potentia, there is evil at the root, but not by birth. And it's not, radical does not mean by birth or by a sin inherited from Adam. Instead, Kant means to say that all human beings have a, quote, propensity to evil, einen Hang zum Bösen. They lean towards evil. Kant speaks of evil as Picatum in potentia. Perhaps we could also say that evil is a logical moment, necessary. A logical moment of both freedom and the moral law. This moment is a necessary one. The subject a priori takes responsibility that it is claimed by the moral law, hence also by evil in potentia, or perhaps better put, good and evil are both moments of this claim by the moral law by which the subject is addressed. Without the moment of evil, the claim of the moral law could not hold sway. In order to gain freedom a priori, one needs to withstand also this moment of evil. But it is a potentiality, and it is actualized once it comes about, once the moral subject accepts responsibility for the moral law under which it stands anyways. But it becomes free only when it accepts the moral law. There's no freedom without lawfulness in Kant. Without the moral law, there's no freedom. One must subject oneself to that law in order to gain freedom. The situation that the Augustinian account of evil provides is precarious for self-legislated moral regeneration. Again, if evil is a malum, a deficiency, then how could one be morally and personally responsible? Deficiency does not point to volitional responsibility, but to sickness to a certain degree. Thus, the Augustinian subject, if you want to have that label in that way, I think that's a bit difficult to say it like this, but this was the way in which I think one had to write for such a thesis. Perhaps one way of saying it, in Augustine's time, man requires prevenient divine aid, and that's not arbitrary. For Augustine, man cannot initiate his moral betterment on his own. For Augustine, God shall, quote, have mercy upon human beings, and they inevitably need God's illumination and healing for their moral betterment. Humans need God's grace to lead a righteous moral life. They need the light of God to see what is good and what is evil, while their wills are not entirely crippled. And perhaps it is saying too much, alleging that evil is pure lack. Still, evil here is a malum metaphysicum, a stain on the soul of man, inherited inevitably, metaphysically, and the only way out is by, or out in a sense is the only way of overcoming it in life is by divine grace. This is understandable for Augustine. For the other side of things would be Pelagian heresy, where God is not needed for humans to lead a moral and good life. Hence, original sin is in some sense is what allows for God to stay or to remain at the center. For Augustus, this in turn means that self-legislated moral regeneration is not possible. Again, self-legislated moral regeneration could even be seen as some form of early atheism. For Kant, in his time, and here we need to be careful for this now not to turn into some exercise of arbitrary comparison. Reason is, however, demanded now to self-legislate for Kant. What does the shift indicate historically? The human is now bare, thrown back onto bare reason, attempting to hold open any access to the light of the revelation through reason alone and in an a priori fashion. Augustine is still held by the light of revelation, which for Kant is already historicized and hence contingent. Kant can only hope to hold open access to that light through the power of reason and her system. At once the individual is thus cast onto its own, and the need requested, demanded by reason to give himself the moral law a priori from out of where, no one knows, and hence also to be tempted a priori by evil, again regardless of history, time, place. There is in Kant no room for original sin, precisely because of this bare nature of human existence that the noumenal demands. We now come from nowhere. We are not Adam and Eve's children, but a priori we are stripped from all but the demands of rationality and her formulaic, empty moral law. Of course, for Kant, this also means to the extreme personal responsibility, yes, but responding to the silent, mute calls of the moral and empty moral law. And at once, of course, what also comes up is the need to save ourselves. There is, in Kant, no endorsement of original sin. There cannot be, for the reason just given. There are commentators who will make the assertion, but it is unfounded and I think blind to the moment of Kant's thought unfolding. This raises the question, would Kant, the philosopher, without parallel, the philosopher of freedom, but of what kind of a freedom? Of a noumenal freedom, of personal responsibility, but of responsibility that responds to what exactly? To the silent calls of the moral law? But still, in this barren noumenal existence, if you like, what would there be? Could there be original sin? There couldn't be in the sense of hereditary sin. But there are, for example, there's a book called Fallen Freedom by Michelson's, published in 1990, which is a severe attack against Kant's religion. Michelson there goes as far as equating radical evil with original sin. But Kant himself flatly dismisses Augustinian original sin as inappropriate. Consider this lengthy passage from the Religion. I quote from Kant. But whatever indeed may be the constitution of moral evil's origin in the human being, yet among all the ways of conceiving its spread and continuation, through all the members of our genus and in all the generations, the most inappropriate is to conceive it as having come to us by inheritance from the first parents, for one can say about moral evil exactly what the poet says about the good. Genus et proavos et quae non fecimus ipsi vix ea nostra puto. Birth and ancestry, and what we have not done ourselves, I hardly consider our own. Kant's view on original sin, therefore, is in line, if you like, with Pelagian heresy, if such a label is helpful at all. Only a deed committed by oneself can be attributed to oneself. The first parent's sin is not our sin, to repeat Kant. We are, as it were, responsible entirely for our own moral betterment, and hence the creation of a morally good and a just world. We do not need to wait for God's mercy. On a deeper level, though, than this and just the label of Pelagianism or anything like this, the human being is here stripped by the demands of rationality from any chain of inheritance. Hence our births, our ancestry, matter not at all because we are not responsible for them. Man is stripped from all relations, and only the bare and barren noumenal subject floats about somewhere in the liminal realm. Kant's terminology here is crucial. The German word for original sin is Erbsünde, which means, in a literal sense, hereditary sin. So it's not so much the original sin by Adam, but the sin that is inherited throughout the eons. But again, Kant is non-historical. For Kant, it is impossible to inherit evil. Otherwise, our evil would not originate from the acts of our free choice, but would be someone else's fault, to put it simply. And inevitably, we would have to hope for God's grace for Him to free us from our first father's imbutable act. On the other hand, Kant did not follow the Enlightenment dogma that inverted the doctrine of original sin by declaring all men good by birth and merely corrupted by the evil structures of Christian society. As is the case for Augustus, evil, according to the Enlightenment dogma, does not come from oneself either, but is external. For Kant, however, moral evil must come in the first instance from one's own act of freedom. True, Kant elaborates on the Picatum Moriginarium in the Religion, which is certainly similar to original sin, as we say in English. However, I think, with some caution, Picatum Moriginarium is for Kant, again, a technical term designating the moral subject's original evil act, sin, which turns that subject a priori, again, before any experience, into a fully and morally responsible moral subject. Kant thus defines Picatum Originarium as an intelligible deed enacted somewhere in the noumenal. Everyone must necessarily commit it in order to become a morally responsible subject under the moral law and its silent cries, in order at all to be able to comprehend the meaning of good and evil. As the moral subject always also incorporates incentives or drives of self-love in his maxim, he commits the Picatum Originarium. The Kantian Picatum Originarium is thus a necessary a priori deed, in quotation marks, if such a term makes sense here at all. And it is necessary in order to become again a fully responsible moral subject who can be held accountable for his actions. In the Religion, this term thus expresses the moral or the moral subject's necessary submission to the moral law which occurs in the timeless sphere. That is to say, the originating sin in Kant is also enacted by the subject itself, without any relation to anyone who came and went before. How this is enacted, I think, is shrouded in the darkness of the noumenon. But that the moral subject is alone in it, and lonely, and alone also in its responsibility for that act, that much I think is clear. While Augustine places man in the great hereditary chain of human being, Again, while Augustine places the human being in the great hereditary chain of human being, Kant strips the human being from this chain and leaves him a nominal subject, stripped from all relations, guided by an empty, silent moral law. Whoever fails that silent moral law fails it because of some opaque act committed in the timeless, cloudy non-sphere of the outermost, unmoved concentric circle, the noumenon, that which has no name, and that act is an opaque act that no one can ever remember, and to which there is that which doesn't tie the human being to Adam and Eve, to any forefathers, foreparents whatsoever. And it is also an act, again, an act without memory. Thank you very much. And as I said before in the beginning, it's your contributions that make this work possible. I'm a free scholar. That means I provide these videos and other things for free. And it's the generous contributions from the public that allow me to continue. And if you'd like to study Kant more closely with me, just follow the link. There will be a link to a course on Kant in the description of this video. Thank you very much indeed.